I never saw it coming. One quiet Monday, my boss called me into his office, eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. "Let's see how many weeks you can handle this," he said, sliding a mountain of work onto my desk, the hardest task he could find. No smile, no encouragement, just a challenge thrown like a gauntlet. I sat there, silent, heart pounding. Life had been so ordinary: office chatter, lunch breaks, and quiet evenings. Now everything was about to change. Before we start, type 1 if you've ever dreamed of getting revenge but never got the chance. No judgment here, and hit that subscribe button. We don't let betrayal slide around here, not even from people who don't subscribe. Let's continue. My name is Clara Jenkins, and at 32 years of age, I found myself perched on the edge of what folks might call a promising career at the Hawthorne & Co. branch. I'd been there for 7 years, long enough to know the rhythm of the place, the taste of the coffee in the break room, and the weight of the boss's disapproving stare when things went sideways. I was an analyst by trade, the sort who preferred numbers over nonsense, spreadsheets over small talk. My world was mostly ordinary, wrapped in the humdrum of daily reports, routine meetings, and the occasional office gossip whispered behind closed doors. My home life mirrored this steadiness: quiet dinners, the occasional Sunday visit to my mother, and an old tabby cat named Whiskers who regarded me with the kind of mild suspicion reserved for strangers and tax collectors. Nothing remarkable, nothing flashy, just steady. But that Monday, when the task landed on my desk like a sack of bricks, I couldn't help but notice the flicker in my boss's eyes, Mr. Landers. He was a man of little words and fewer smiles, but that day his gaze was colder, sharper, like a trapdoor creaking open beneath my feet. "Let's see how many weeks you can handle this," he said. And in that brief, almost dismissive sentence, I smelled the faint but unmistakable scent of challenge mixed with something darker, doubt, maybe even disdain. I remember walking back to my desk feeling the usual buzz of the office, the clatter of keyboards, the occasional laugh, the soft ring of phones. But beneath it all, something had shifted, like the first tremor before an earthquake. I started noticing the small things. The way Landers would glance sideways when I entered the room, his lips pressed tight as if holding back a sneer. The subtle way my suggestions in meetings were brushed aside, while others received nods and smiles. The late-night emails demanding revisions with a tone sharper than the point of a porcupine's quill. One afternoon, I caught him in the hallway, leaning close to Janet from accounting, whispering with a look that made Janet's face drain of color. Later, Janet confided in me, voice low and eyes darting. "Clara, I don't think Landers wants you to succeed. It's like he's setting you up to fail." I nodded slowly, a chill crawling up my spine. I had no intention of playing the fool in someone else's game. But the question gnawed at me. Why now? What had I done to earn such cold suspicion? So I did what any sensible woman would do. I prepared quietly. I dove headfirst into the work, waking before dawn to study, staying late to double-check every detail. My mind was a steel trap, locking down every piece of data, every email, every interaction. I kept my head down, my mouth shut, but my eyes wide open. In those long evenings, I would sit by the window, Whiskers curled on my lap, and practice conversations in my head. "If he wants to test me," I murmured to the cat, "then I'll show him what a storm looks like when it's brewing." The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock and the faint scratch of Whiskers's claws on the armchair. I also reached out subtly to my colleagues, those who weren't blinded by Landers's shadow. There was Simon, a quiet sort with a knack for details, and Marlene, whose smile could light up the gloomiest spreadsheet. Over coffee breaks and quick hallway chats, I gathered tidbits of insight, careful not to reveal too much. One evening, as I was packing up, Simon caught my arm. "Clara, you're on the right track, but don't let Landers' attitude shake you. He's like a grumpy old mule, stubborn and mean, but you're the one holding the reins." I smiled, appreciating the analogy, and replied, "Well, Simon, I'm ready to drive this mule anywhere it needs to go, just watch me." No one saw it yet, but I was quietly assembling my armor. It wasn't just about finishing the task anymore, it was about surviving the battlefield. By the third week, I had noticed Landers' growing impatience. His emails shortened to curt sentences, his glances sharpened. I imagined him sitting behind his polished desk, tapping his fingers like a judge waiting to deliver a verdict. But I stayed steady, meeting every challenge with calm resolve. On a chilly Thursday morning, Marlene stopped by my desk with a wink. "If you make it through this, Clara, you're made of tougher stuff than anyone around here." I chuckled softly, feeling a strange warmth despite the cold that settled in the office corners. I intend to, I said. Let's just see how many weeks I can handle it. And so I worked in silence, gathering strength like a river swelling before the flood. Little did I know, the coming months would be the reckoning not just of my endurance, but of everything I believed about loyalty, ambition, and the quiet power of persistence. It was exactly 3 months to the day since Landers had thrown that mountain of work onto my desk, with his clipped challenge hanging in the air like a dark cloud. And well, I reckoned I had held on through long nights and endless spreadsheets, through silent snubs and whispered doubts. But what happened next? That was something no one in that office could have foreseen, least of all me. That morning started like any other, gray skies pressing down on the city, the usual shuffle of tired feet in the lobby, the murmur of coffee machines and printers. I was bent over my reports, fine-tuning the last figures when Marlene breezed past, a flicker of excitement in her eyes that was unusual for her. "Clara, you heard," she whispered as she dropped a folder on my desk. "Hear what?" I said, looking up, suspicion prickling my skin. "The executive board's meeting. They've picked someone for the branch expansion team." I frowned. The branch expansion team was the golden ticket around these parts, the kind of thing that could launch you out of the cubicle jungle and into something resembling real career success. "Who?" I asked, my voice low. Marlene glanced around, leaned in closer. "You." I blinked, caught off guard. "Me, are you sure?" "Positive, I was in the meeting. They praised your work, your perseverance. Said you're the only one tough enough for the task." Just then, Simon appeared, a broad grin stretching across his face. "Looks like Landers' little game backfired, huh?" My stomach twisted. Landers, well, he was nowhere in sight. Word was he'd been transferred out of the branch, quietly shuffled to a desk far from the action. I remember the room feeling suddenly too small, the air thick with disbelief and a strange, sweet taste of victory. Later that day, as I packed my things to meet with the expansion team, I ran into Janet from accounting. She gave me a nod, her eyes bright with something like respect. "Guess you showed him, huh?" "I reckon I did," I replied, trying to steady my voice. Just then Landers himself appeared as if summoned by the news. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held a flicker of something that looked like surprise, maybe even grudging respect. He stopped in front of me and said quietly, "Well, Clara, looks like you lasted longer than I expected." I met his gaze, calm as a lake at dawn. "Longer than you thought. And just getting started." His lips twitched into something that might have been a smirk, but the old guard was fading. The office had shifted underfoot and I was standing tall in the new dawn. Later, Simon clapped me on the shoulder. "You've got the grit, Clara. Just remember, this is only the beginning." I smiled, the weight of months of silent struggle lifting, replaced by the buzz of possibility. "Then I'll meet whatever comes with open eyes and a steady hand." And with that, I stepped out of the shadow of doubt and into the bright, if uncertain, light of new challenges. The hardest task had been only the prologue. What lay ahead? Well, that was a story I was ready to write. Now I won't pretend it was all sunshine and smooth sailing after that unexpected announcement. No, ma'am. If anything, what came next was like walking through a thick fog, where every step forward required careful feeling and sharp eyes. Because while the executive board had finally taken notice of me, there remained shadows in the corners, whispers and sideways glances that reminded me the game was far from over. You see, Landers hadn't just been some cranky boss with a penchant for impossible tasks. He was a man who'd played the politics of the office like a fiddler plays a tune, sometimes sweet, sometimes sour, always calculated. And I knew that if I wanted to keep my footing and grow beyond this challenge, I needed more than just grit and persistence. I needed proof, cold and clear, of the quiet ways he'd tried to undercut me. So I settled into a different kind of work, one that required patience and a keen eye. I started keeping detailed notes, meticulous, painstaking records of emails, meeting minutes, even the small offhand comments that might have slipped past others but not me. I catalogued every late request from Landers, every unreasonable demand, and every time he'd taken credit for my ideas or buried them beneath layers of bureaucracy. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about building a fortress of truth I could stand behind when the time came. One evening, as the city's streetlights flickered to life outside my apartment window, Simon stopped by with his usual quiet encouragement. He brought with him a battered folder stuffed with printouts and notes he'd gathered from the IT department and some of the newer hires. "Clara," he said, eyes serious, "Landers has been moving things around in ways that don't look right. I think you need to see this." I flipped through the papers, each one a thread unraveling the tapestry of Landers's sly maneuvers. There were altered reports, missed deadlines he'd hidden, and a trail of little mistakes that seemed less accidental with every glance. Marlene, ever the social butterfly with an eagle's mind, dropped by the next day with gossip that was, as always, half rumor, half fact. They say Landers was setting traps, baiting you with that impossible task to see if you'd stumble. But look at you, dancing through the minefield like a cat on a hot tin roof. I laughed softly, though my jaw was tight with resolve. A dance I'm learning well. It wasn't just about what Landers had done to me, but what he might try to do next. I knew the best defense was a good offense, and the best offense was preparation. One afternoon, I found myself sitting across from Marlene in the cramped break room, the hum of the vending machine punctuating our quiet conversation. "Clara," she said, lowering her voice, "if this ever comes to a head, you'll need allies, people who can back you up." I nodded. I'm gathering them, the truth's on my side. But it wasn't just the people or the papers. I began to study the company's policies, the legal bindings of our contracts, the fine print that many overlooked in the rush of daily grind. There were clauses and loopholes, protections that could turn the tide if wielded with care and knowledge. My nights grew longer, the lines between work and home blurring as I buried myself in manuals, regulations, and legal jargon that felt more like a foreign language than English. Whiskers, ever the judge, would watch me with those eyes that said, "You're mad, you know that." But I wasn't mad, I was preparing. One night after hours, I walked the empty halls of the office, the silence pressing close like a heavy quilt. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Simon, ready for the next step. His reply came almost immediately, always. That simple exchange felt like a lifeline. In the following weeks, I moved with quiet precision, subtle conversations, discreet requests for information, careful sharing of evidence with trusted members of the board who had begun to notice the discrepancies. It was a slow dance of diplomacy and resolve, where every word mattered and every move was weighed. I found strength in the details, power in the truth, and slowly but surely, I built the case that would not only protect me but expose the cracks in Landers's carefully constructed facade. And all the while, I kept reminding myself, this wasn't just about survival. It was about turning the tables, about transforming a challenge into a triumph. The hardest task was no longer just the mountain of work he'd assigned me, it was the mountain I was about to climb to reclaim my place, my dignity, and my future. Because, after all, sometimes the quietest waters run the deepest, and I was ready to flood the valley. The day of reckoning arrived unannounced, like a summer thunderstorm that catches you unprepared but leaves the air fresher afterward. I was in my office, the sunlight slanting through the blinds and casting sharp stripes across my desk, when the door creaked open. It was Landers, looking as composed as a cat stalking its prey, though I could see the faint tremble beneath that calm exterior. He stepped in, closing the door behind him with a measured click that sounded louder than usual. "Clara," he began, his voice smooth as molasses but with a hint of steel beneath, "I hear you've been stirring up trouble." I glanced up from my notes, eyes steady, voice calm. "Trouble? No, Mr. Landers. I've simply been doing my job and making sure the facts are clear." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Facts are a funny thing, aren't they? You've been collecting evidence against me, haven't you?" "I've been gathering truth," I corrected, tapping the folder on my desk. "And that truth speaks louder than whispers or suspicion." For a moment, the room was thick with silence, the kind that presses on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Then Landers stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think you're clever, don't you? Outmaneuvering me with your notes and alliances, but this game is bigger than you realize." I leaned back, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Maybe. But I'm not playing to lose." Just then Simon popped his head in the doorway, eyes sharp and wary. "Clara, the board's waiting. They want to hear what you have." Landers's eyes narrowed. "So this is a setup?" "No, Mr. Landers," I said firmly, standing up. "It's a showdown and I'm ready." We walked together to the conference room, the tension coiling tighter with every step. The board members sat around the polished table, faces a mixture of curiosity and stern expectation. Landers took his seat with a forced smile, but I could see the tightness around his mouth. I began laying out the evidence, clear emails where deadlines were concealed, reports mysteriously altered, credit stolen and given to others. Each document was a brick in the wall I was building, and as I spoke, the room grew still, the weight of truth settling in like dusk. One board member, Mr. Harrison, a man known for his no-nonsense approach, leaned forward. "Clara, this is serious. Have you considered the consequences?" I have, I replied, and I stand by the facts. It's not just about me, it's about the integrity of this company. Landers shifted in his seat, voice tight. I won't deny I made mistakes, but this is a calculated attack. Calculated or not, I said, the damage is real. And it's time for accountability. The tension cracked then like a whip snapping in the air. Landers rose, face pale but resolute. You may have caught me this time, but don't think this ends here. I smiled, the kind of smile that holds a secret victory. Oh, I'm counting on it, because I'm ready for whatever comes next. After the meeting, as the board deliberated, I found myself outside the building, the cool breeze a balm against my racing heart. Marlene approached, eyes shining. You were incredible, Clara, calm, collected like a general commanding her troops. I laughed softly, more like a mule who learned to kick. Simon joined us, nodding in agreement. You turned the tables with brains and guts. That's no small feat. In the days that followed, the office buzzed with quiet rumors. Landers was put on administrative leave pending further review. The weight of his schemes began to unravel piece by piece. But more importantly, I felt a shift within myself, a surge of strength that wasn't just about winning a fight, but about claiming my own worth. One afternoon, as I was organizing files, Landers stopped by one last time. His tone was low, almost a whisper. You've changed the game, Clara, I underestimated you. I hope you learned something, I said, holding his gaze. Underestimating people like me always comes with a price. He nodded slowly, then turned and walked away, the past closing behind him like a door finally shut. That confrontation was the fulcrum on which everything pivoted. It wasn't just about exposing deceit, it was about standing firm, about showing that intelligence, preparation, and quiet strength could topple even the most stubborn obstacles. And in that victory, I found not just a new path, but a new version of myself, resilient, unyielding, and ready for whatever lay ahead. The aftermath of that stormy confrontation settled on the office like the calm after a fierce summer tempest. But if you thought the hardest part was over, well, you'd be mistaken. For victory in these affairs doesn't come from a single blow. It comes from the steady work that follows, the careful tending of every loose thread until the whole tapestry holds tight. Once Landers was sidelined, the wheels of change began to turn, slow and deliberate. I wasn't handed the reins outright. No, this was a careful dance, one where every move counted and every misstep could cost more than just pride. I had plans, yes, but they were fragile and needed nurturing. The branch expansion team, newly formed and humming with potential, awaited my leadership. It was a mix of seasoned veterans and fresh-faced hires, all sizing each other up, all wary of the new captain at the helm. I could feel their eyes, some hopeful, some doubtful, like the curious crowd at a county fair watching the tightrope walker step onto the wire. Clara, Simon said one morning, dropping by my office with his usual quiet grin, you're doing well. But remember, this is just the start. I nodded, running my fingers over the pile of reports and proposals strewn across my desk. I know, but a start's where you build from. The first order of business was to bring order to chaos. Landers had left his mess behind, half-finished projects, tangled contracts, and a team that had lost faith. I set about sorting through it all, calling meetings, listening more than I spoke, and slowly weaving the scattered threads into something coherent. At one such meeting, Marlene piped up, a twinkle in her eye. You know, Clara, you make this look easier than it is. I laughed, feeling the tension ease just a bit. Don't be fooled. It's like trying to teach cats to line dance. She chuckled, and the room warmed with shared laughter, a sign that maybe, just maybe, we were beginning to move as one. As the weeks passed, small victories piled up. Contracts got signed on time, budgets balanced, and the team started to click. The executive board noticed. Compliments came my way, subtle but sincere, like a pat on the back after a long climb. One afternoon, as I was packing up to leave, the phone rang. It was Mr. Harrison, the board member who'd questioned me months before. His voice was warm. Clara, I've been reviewing the progress. You're turning this ship around faster than I expected. Well done. That simple praise felt like a fresh breeze on a weary face, but it wasn't just about work. The changes seeped into my own outlook. I found myself standing a little taller, speaking with more confidence and dreaming bigger dreams. The shadow Landers had cast grew thinner and thinner, replaced by a light I was learning to carry. One evening, Simon and I stayed late, the office silent except for the hum of computers. You've changed this place, he said softly. I smiled, tired but content. I think it's changed me too. And through it all, Whiskers waited patiently at home. His soft purrs a reminder that no matter the battles, some things remained constant. The hardest task had turned into the greatest lesson, that perseverance, strategy, and a steady heart could reshape not just a job, but a life. And with that knowledge, I was ready for whatever came next. By the time the leaves had begun to turn gold and rust, the ripple effects of those quiet battles I'd fought were no longer whispers in the hallway. They were the talk of the company. Landers, once the iron-fisted king of the office, found himself adrift in unfamiliar waters. His transfer to a lesser branch was more than a demotion. It was a public unseating, the kind that made men shrink in their shoes and rethink their next moves. I heard from Marlene one afternoon, her voice a mix of sympathy and schadenfreude. "Word is, Landers is struggling over there, can't keep up with the pace and the staff don't respect him like they did here." Simon added in his usual deadpan, "Funny how the mighty fall when the ground beneath them shakes." I couldn't help but smile at their candor. Change was never pretty, but it was necessary, and Landers's downfall was a testament to that. Meanwhile, my own path was blazing forward, carved from the ashes of those old struggles. The executive board, having seen the results of the branch expansion under my watch, offered me a seat at their table, not just as a voice, but as a decision-maker. I remember the day Mr. Harrison called me into his office. The walls were lined with books and awards, a shrine to corporate conquest. He looked at me with a mixture of respect and something like pride. "Clara," he said, "your perseverance and intellect have reshaped not only this branch but the company's future. We'd like to offer you a permanent position on the executive board." I swallowed the lump in my throat, the gravity of the moment settling over me like a fine silk shawl. "Thank you, sir. I accept." But it wasn't just about titles or power. The victory was sweeter because it came from hard work, from standing firm when others doubted me. One evening, as I sat in my office reflecting on the journey, Simon popped in, a familiar grin lighting up his face. "You know, Clara, you're a force to be reckoned with. I always knew you had it in you." I chuckled, leaning back in my chair. Took a bit longer to show it, but better late than never. The changes reached beyond the boardroom. Relationships that had once been strained began to mend, forged anew with respect and understanding. I found allies where I least expected them, colleagues who once whispered doubts now offering encouragement. Financially, things took a turn too. With the success of the branch expansion, bonuses followed, investments grew, and my personal savings, once modest, began to swell. I bought a small condo not far from the office, a cozy place with a view of the city skyline where whiskers could chase sunbeams without judgment. Yet amid all this, the most profound change was within. The lessons carved deep grooves in my soul, resilience in the face of adversity, the power of quiet strategy, and the unshakable strength that comes from knowing your own worth. There were still moments when the past whispered, shadows flickering at the edges of my mind. But I met them head-on now, armed with experience and confidence. One afternoon, as I reviewed some contracts, a message popped up on my phone from an old colleague at Landers's new branch. "He's lost without you. Thanks for showing us all how it's done." I smiled, fingers tapping out a reply. Some lessons are hard but necessary. That night, as the city lights twinkled outside my window, I thought about the journey, the betrayals, the battles, the victories. And I knew this was only the beginning. Because success isn't just about climbing ladders or earning titles. It's about the courage to stand tall when the world tries to knock you down, and the wisdom to keep walking, no matter the storm. And that, my friends, is a lesson worth every hard-won step. The past, with all its weight and shadow, finally began to settle behind me like the last page of a well-read book. I was no longer the woman who sat silent beneath Lander's sneer or labored unseen under impossible demands. No, I had become something else, stronger, wiser, and unshackled from the doubts that once threatened to drown me. My days now were a far cry from the tense hours spent chasing elusive truths or patching broken teams. Instead, they was filled with meetings where my voice mattered, decisions that shaped futures, and the rare, quiet moments where I could breathe easy. Whiskers, ever my companion, lounged beside me as I pondered the horizon from my little condo's window, watching the city pulse with life and possibility. One afternoon, Simon dropped by unannounced, his grin as familiar as ever. "So, Clara," he said, settling into the chair opposite me, "what's next for the woman who turned a mountain into a molehill?" I smiled, swirling the coffee in my cup. "That's the thing, Simon, I'm not quite sure. But I know I'm ready for it." He nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like freedom." "Freedom," I agreed. "From fear, from doubt, from the shadows of the past. I've learned that the hardest tasks aren't just tests, they're invitations to grow. Marlene, ever the voice of spirited wisdom, chimed in as she entered the room. And you, Clara, have grown into a force no one can ignore. I laughed softly. It wasn't luck or chance, it was patience, strategy, and the stubborn refusal to give up. The journey had taught me that success wasn't a destination, but a path paved with resilience and quiet courage. I thought back to the woman who once sat at her desk, wondering how long she could endure the impossible. Now she sat ready not just to endure but to thrive. As the sun dipped low, casting a warm glow through the window, I found myself whispering a promise, to myself, to the future, to keep walking that path with open eyes and an unyielding heart. After all, life's hardest tasks are not meant to break us, they're meant to shape us into who we're meant to be. And as for what lies ahead, well, that's a story still waiting to be told. But I can tell you this, whatever it is, I'm ready. A few days later, as I sat with Simon and Marlene at our favorite coffee shop, the conversation drifted to dreams and possibilities. You know, Simon said, stirring his cup thoughtfully, you've become more than just a survivor, Clara. You're an inspiration. Marlene nodded in agreement. There's a whole world out there waiting for someone like you to take the reins. I looked out the window, watching people hustle by, each with their own battles, their own dreams. Maybe it's time I started writing new chapters, not just for me, but for others who feel stuck in the shadows. Simon smiled. Now that's a plan. And in that moment, surrounded by friends and hope, I realized that my journey was far from over. It was just beginning. With courage as my compass and resilience as my guide, I stepped forward into the unknown, ready to embrace whatever challenges and triumphs awaited. Because the story of life is never finished.